Hey everyone, and welcome back to week 3 of our series, Reach 2020. And through this series, what we've kind of been doing is looking at two different areas and how they kind of connect with each other. The first that we've been looking at is the vision of Vineyard Church and how we as a youth ministry fit into that bigger vision. And really the second area that we've been exploring is what does God say to us in the middle of looking at that vision as individuals, and what are our roles in that? So we start with week 1 looking at the call simply to be generous, and that includes you and me, and we're called to be those that freely give what God has given us. And last week we looked at what does it look like to start to shift from a place of belief in God to a place of fully trusting God with our lives, and that means all of our finance, every aspect of it. And the writers of the Bible really spend a lot of time looking at the nature of who God is, as well as attaching the idea that this leads to a trust as a central part of our relationship with God. This week, as we continue to look at the vision of Vineyard and how this campaign to raise money fits in the grander scope of what we're doing, one of the key factors that I want to point out today is that asking for money is not necessarily just so we can have more money. We feel a really deep responsibility as a church and as leadership to be great managers and stewards of what God's given us. And as we pray about each year where we're going, what we're doing, how this vision goes forward, we're reminded that people are the most important thing to God. And seeing people saved for eternity is really the heartbeat of what drives God, is to reach people's hearts. And of all the things that are important, other people really rank number 1 in that whole thing. And so if you remember last week, we talked about how we as a church are in rare company in the fact that we're growing, and we're growing a thriving community, and that we're actually introducing people to Jesus. But we also talked about the fact that we're running out of room and space at this campus. And so the best utilization of resources that God does provide is that we create more spots for other people to be a part of what we're doing here. And that is really through the campus model. The best use of resources is not to add more seats in one place or another, but to really continue to expand into other areas. So we want to be great stewards. And this is a really great topic to think about as it relates to the rest of our lives as well. I mean, the truth of faithfulness in our use of resources towards creating an impact in other people's lives goes simply beyond just how the church does it, but it's also a question of how we, as followers of Jesus, utilize the resources that he has given us. In Matthew 25, we find that Jesus tells a parable about this very concept, and let's look at it together, and then we're going to take a few concepts out of it as we go. And in Matthew 25, he says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. And he called together his servants, and he entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it proportionally to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money, and he earned 5 more bags. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip, and he called them to give an account of how they had used his money. And the servant whom he had entrusted the 5 bags came forward with 5 more and said, 'Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest. I have earned 5 more.' The master was full of praise. 'Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together.' The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, 'Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more.' And the master said, 'Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together.' Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, 'Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops where you didn't plant and gathering crops where you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back.' But the master replied, 'You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I would have gotten some interest on it.' Then he ordered, 'Take the money from the servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they who have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" So let's recap really quickly. The master goes out of town. He gives a bunch of money to his servants. And first, let's just acknowledge here, how strange this probably seemed to the people that were hearing the story. Think about it this way. I'm leaving town, and I'm going to give you all my money. Take care of it. And in this day, this would have been a big deal because the ones that had the money would have also been given full authority to operate on behalf of the master. Meaning, whatever they did with the money was final. It happened under the master's name, and the owner couldn't come back with any recourse. He couldn't sue them. He couldn't try to get he couldn't get that money back. If they lost it, it was just gone. They were walking with the full authority of the master. So the first two people in this story invest the money, double it, and are rewarded. And then the last guy wasn't quite so lucky. He hid the money. He didn't lose it, so there's that. But he is punished because, and the first guy gets all of his money. And he was punished because he just took the safe away. He didn't do anything with it. He buried it, and it's like, hey, here's what you gave me back. Congratulations. But what I really want to look at here is how each person responded to the master. If you look at the story, both the first two people understood something that the last one didn't. They both, when they were talking about the money, expressed an understanding that they were entrusted with something of the master, something that was given to them. The third one took a completely different tone. I don't know if you noticed that or not. The third servant sounded a lot like a middle schooler. Just kidding, kind of. He starts right away explaining to the master why this is all completely his fault. I've heard about you. You're a hard master. You're mean. You harvest what you didn't plant. You're kind of lazy and you abuse other people. And I was scared and I was afraid. So there's that abusive thing again. So right away, he starts explaining to the master, completely off base from what we've seen, mind you, that he's really the one to blame. This isn't my fault. This is all on you. Anyone ever been there before? So this story, what does it mean for us? What can we take away from it? I just want to take a couple brief things that we can look at. The first is understand that you have been entrusted with something. The root of all that we have, all that we do, is that we have things that belong to God. Like everything that we've earned, everything that we have in our life really belongs to God. It's a fruit of what God's given us. If you were here a couple weeks ago, we looked at the fact that all we have is God's, so really we have nothing to boast about. All we can brag about is the fact that God has trusted us with things. So for these servants that display that truth, the wealth that they had belonged to the master, and it changed the way they thought about it. Let me ask you, how would you look at your money different if you were to think about it the way that it is God's, is that he has entrusted you with it? So it's God's money, and he's simply just entrusted it with you, to your hands to do what you wish. What would you do with your talents and gift that you don't do now if you thought about it as the fact that God gave me these, and he entrusted me with these to do something with them? What would you do with the people in your life? Also something that God gives us. The list can go on and on and on. We're all entrusted with things all around us. And we are responsible to God and to each other for the way we use those gifts. Yes, that even means school. That even means your siblings, how you react to them. God has placed you where you are to do your best with what you're given, to be faithful with what areas you're placed in. Secondly, when we faithfully walk out what God has given us, we position ourselves to be trusted with more. This is what the master demonstrates here. Multiple times he tells the three the faithfulness of what they have done qualified them to receive more. The person with the 2 bags, he didn't get caught up in the fact that there was somebody that had more with him than him. He didn't go and pout because he wasn't given 5 bags. He simply went and did the most with what he was given and then was entrusted with more. But the truth is that even the more is not simply for us. The fact that they all got more didn't mean they suddenly were no longer responsible to be good stewards. It didn't mean that they were off the hook. They still worked for the same master. They still were entrusted by the same master. So let's bring this down to where we live. In your life, you have been given a lot. Even if you might not have a ton of money, or you might be completely dependent on your parents, or you might not be the most gifted or talented person in the world, you still have a lot that you can be faithful with. You can be faithful with your relationships, with your time, with the education that's in front of you. You can do your best. Even if don't have the best skill set, you can still do the most with what you have. What money you have, you can do the most with it. And it can go on and on and on. The people that have gone the farthest in life that I've noticed are the ones that might not be the smartest. They might not have the most natural ability, but they're the ones that took what they had, understood that they were entrusted with something, and became good stewards with what they did have. They said, hey, you know what? I might not be the smartest kid in the classroom, but I'm going to work the hardest and get the best grades, or I'm going to work the hardest and get the most out of this. These are the ones that have taken away the most in my experiences. So when we understand that this all comes from God and it's centered around His grace and His mercy and giving us what we might not deserve, but giving to us all the same, then we understand that we're simply stewards of what God has given us. And so the question that becomes, what are you looking and what are you going to do the most with it? How are you going to use it? Are you really making the most of it? Or are you simply just hanging on to it and burying it? Are you coasting? Are you staying in that safe place? Are you doing your homework at school? Are you making the most of your relationships? Are you using your talents and gifts to reach other people? Are you investing in your talents and gifts to get better at them? Or are you too busy focusing on how hard it is or how unfair it is that you don't have the 5 bags of money? Listen, whether you think you've been given a lot or just a little, the message that we can all have through this is that what we are entrusted with, we can make the most of it. That's why in Romans 12, Paul's talking to the church in Rome, and he says, whatever gifts you have, do them to the absolute best of your ability. And I believe that each one of us has a lot that we've been entrusted with. And so the question is, what are you going to do with it? Because the truth is that God's given us a lot, and we're called to be great stewards, and we're called to do something with it. So this week, take stock of your life, and what areas has God really entrusted you with something? Whether it be abilities, time, money, relationships, whatever the case may be, ask yourself if you can honestly say that you're being a good steward with what God's given you. What areas has He given something to you? And the question being, what are you going to do with it? Maybe it means investing more in school than you have. Maybe it means taking time that you have to serve other people. Whatever it is, I would encourage you to talk to somebody about it and have them help keep you accountable to really do something with what God's given you. Thanks for being here, guys. Look forward to seeing you next week.